Today's scripture is Kings 1, 3 through 14, and page 306 in some of your books and 292 in others. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. Only he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in, and your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. Now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall rise again after you. Give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare to you. If you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life." This is the Lord's word.
Our first reading, as Sunday read, was from 1 Kings, about King Solomon. And our second reading for today is a book of the Bible that is attributed to Solomon. It is called Song of Solomon. The passage that we read comes from chapter 2, verses 8 through 13. And it is two voices who are singing a song of love to each other. And we have some slides that break this down. The first voice is the voice of the young woman. I'm going to invite the women of the congregation to read these first verses, and then the men will respond in verse 10. So, ladies, are we ready? It's in pink background, I think, that Lisa did, so the ladies will know that this is for us. Women, the voice of my beloved, look, he comes, leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing in at the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved says to me, and men, arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Song of Solomon, these verses that we just read, come from a book that is called the Book of Love in the Bible. It's a song of love between a shepherd and a young maiden, love between a king and a princess, love between a bridegroom and his bride. These two lovers, whoever they may have been, shared a passionate love, a love between each other that was boldly described in sometimes sensuous terms, sometimes even earthy terms as we read through the rest of the Song of Solomon. And the more we work our way through some of those texts and try and determine the meaning and the intent for us today and to work at that symbolism, the more intimate it becomes. One historical approach to reading this text in an effort to interpret around some of that sexual symbolism was to consider the Song of Solomon to be what's called an allegory. This is something like an extended metaphor. And so Jewish interpreters over the centuries would describe the text as being something of a description of the relationship between God and his people, Israel. God would be the bridegroom king, and Israel, his bride, his beloved. And Christian interpreters picked up this same way of approaching the text, and they would attribute the relationship so that Christ is the lover and the church, his beloved. More modern interpreters have pointed out that there's actually no direct reference to God or Christ in any of these passages, and they've gone to the other extreme. And they have tended to view Song of Solomon as merely a compilation maybe of ancient Near Eastern wedding songs or fertility liturgies. And so the question comes to us this day: is Song of Solomon merely a description of the mystical relationship between God and God's people? And we have to answer that in the sense that it most likely does have some aspects of that. The Israelites who first sang this song would have not made the kind of separation between the sacred and the secular or the natural order in the way that we do. So for them, it was all one and the same thing. Or is the song just a celebration of human love as written by the Masters and Johnson of the day? And we perhaps need to answer that it is that as well, because if you look at it, they could have made the theological points that they were making without the PG-13 rating for some of the passages. And for us, perhaps the song is both of these things, both a description of the mystical relationship between God and God's people, or Christ and his church, and also a description of human love. And for us, there are components of both of that. The song works on both of those levels, and it makes sense because our relationship with God calls us to love one another as well, and we confess God as our creator, and that means that it's all of creation, all of God's creation that we are confessing, and that includes physical love. And so we come to our text this morning hearing first the voice of the maiden, of the bride, of the beloved, as she sees her young lover approaching. She sings in verse 8, "Look," she sings, "here he comes, leaping upon the mountains," like a gazelle, or for the choir. "Look, there he stands, gazing in at the windows, looking through the lattice." This energetic and agile lover has brought good news. The flowers are in bloom, the trees are budding, the birds are singing. Winter is over. Springtime has come. Some things have never changed. Springtime is still the time for love in our culture. his desire for her is equally enthusiastic and energetic and eloquent. He says to her, "Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away." The romantic lyrics of this poetic song between the two work as easily today as they did centuries ago. But as we dig for deeper meaning in the text, what we will hear is the echo of something else that is anticipated, not just the arrival of her young shepherd, but the anticipation and arrival of the Messiah. And an earlier audience, more familiar with the Old Testament text, might have heard that echo more clearly. And what it is a reference to the Messiah coming over the mountains. We read from the prophet Isaiah, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim salvation." We would also hear the reference to the turtle dove as a reference not only to the fact that springtime is upon us, but to the arrival of the dove. Remember the dove in the story of Noah, the dove who brings the branch that signals that life is going to begin again. Remember Jesus' reference to the sign of Jonah. Jonah's name in Hebrew means dove. Again, even though Jesus describing that he's going to the cross, he refers to this as the sign of Jonah, and this is that there will be new life again. And so in this simple song between these two young lovers, we hear the echo of a deeper desire of the people anticipating the coming of new life, the arrival of the long-awaited Messiah. God acts out of divine love for our salvation. We know that. That is our faith that we confess. But what does it mean? What does it mean for us that the Creator of the universe desires us to have and experience that new life, to have that salvation with the same kind of intensity and sense of urgency and desire that the shepherd has for the maiden or the bridegroom has for his bride? You know, we talk casually about our personal relationship with Jesus, but have we ever thought about that relationship in terms of flowers and trees and the birds and the bees? And I dare you to think about it in those terms. The Song of Solomon dares us to think about it in those terms, encourages and invites us to understand that God desires that life for us with the same level of intensity that the young man desires his bride. He says to her, "Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away." No reminder here of how we have failed God in the past. Arise and come away. No expectations about what we could possibly bring to this relationship with a holy God. Arise and come away. No preconditions or demands for obligations to be filled in the future. Arise and come away. No itinerary to plan or suitcases to pack. Just arise and come away. Away from the brokenness and the sin in our lives. Away from the burdens that weigh us down. Arise and come away into the loving arms of Jesus. The images that we read described in the Song of Solomon, not just in these passages, but as it continues throughout the book, are some that come from horticulture. These are images of vineyards and groves, gardens. Love is a lush landscape of blossoming flowers and ripe fruits and fragrant herbs. And that shouldn't surprise us. Because the garden was our first home, was it not? Garden was our first calling to work in the garden, to be with God there. And so it makes sense that the divine invitation to rise and come away would draw on that metaphor of that long remembered place, because we still have a deep yearning in our souls to return to that place, to return to the place where God is and God loves us, to be in the place where a loving God walks and talks with God's people, with the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve, where God had an intimate familial relationship with the man and the woman that he created in his own image to be children of God. Even today, we still yearn to be in that place where God walks with us and talks with us, where God calls you and I, his own. There's a song that was written, I think it's almost 100 years ago now, that shares the poignancy of that deep desire to be with God. The composer is said to have been inspired by the image of Mary Magdalene reaching out to Jesus in the garden. And the lyrics go like this: I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. God promises that we shall all be gardeners again someday. The description in Revelation of the New Jerusalem describes a glorious city and a new temple, but it is also a description full of lush imagery of the garden, a reminder that that is the place that we are meant to dwell with God, the place where we will once again eat the fruit of the tree of life. The last verse of the text that we read today, in verse 13, makes an allusion to that fruit. Verse 13, the fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. This reference is not to mature fruit. It is to the fruit of the first blossoming of the vine, where there is an indication from the small buds that are coming of the green fruit, that the fruit will later mature and endure. Indeed, as we read through the rest of Song of Solomon, we can see that that love between the two, the shepherd and the maiden, the king and his princess, the bridegroom and the bride, that their love has endured and has matured. It is a love that endures even beyond the grave, as we read in that very famous passage from chapter 8. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, passion fierce as the grave, its flashes of fire a raging flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. Human love fails. We fail each other in our relationship. We abuse love. We reject it. We pervert it. We corrupt it in so many ways. God's love never fails. God's love never ends. We shall be gardeners again someday. Arise and come away into the garden.